The Singapore Grand Prix should have been a triumph for McLaren. Instead, the first lap turned into a symbol of how thin the line between team spirit and rivalry is in the modern Formula One circus. Oscar Piastri, the world championship leader, and his teammate Lando Norris clashed in the opening phase, an incident about which Piastri later wanted to say almost nothing. Almost. Subscribe now to the channel if you believe McLaren is on the brink of an internal storm. It was one of those scenes that immediately breaks every radio silence in the paddock. No sooner had the race begun than Norris aggressively searched for a way past Max Verstappen to secure third place. But in attempting to attack the Red Bull on the outside, he briefly lost grip and crashed into the side of Piastri's MCL39. The contact was light, but the symbolism heavy. Two McLarens wheel-to-wheel for positions that could be decisive for the title race. Race control examined the scene but quickly came to the conclusion: no further action necessary. A decision that was hard for Piastri to swallow. The Australian, usually stoic and composed, let his frustration show over the radio. But as soon as the cameras were running, he switched back to diplomatic mode. Obviously a difficult race, difficult first lap, but I haven't seen the replay yet, he said in an interview with Sky Sports F1. I only know the scene from the onboard perspective, so I'll look at it later. But it was still a great evening for the whole team. These words were so precisely measured that they seemed almost sterile. No reproach, no clear comment. Piastri knew that every wrong word could generate headlines. The young Australian is not just concerned about points, but also about control. Control over the narrative, over public perception, over the mood in a team that revolves around two drivers who could hardly be more different. Lando Norris, on the other hand, pursued his own strategy. Talk, act, win. While Piastri struggled for balance with a damaged floor, Norris seized the opportunity to regain the team's trust and finish the race on the podium. Ironically, he benefited from the fact that McLaren had decided to keep the matter internal and not issue team orders. McLaren team principal Andrea Stella later praised both drivers for their respectful approach, a phrase that sounded almost ironic when you looked at the growing tension between the two. Zach Brown, always mindful of the big picture, tried to smooth the waters. Our drivers race hard but fair. But those who listened carefully noticed that it wasn't about this one incident. It was about a dynamic that has been building for months. Piastri, the young title contender, the cool analyst, faces a Norris who for years was considered the hope of the future and now risks being overshadowed by his own teammate. When Piastri was again confronted with the question of whether the maneuver drew a new line within the team, he evaded. "I don't know," he said curtly. "I haven't seen the incident from the TV perspective yet, so I don't want to comment." A classic Piastri move, reserved, controlled, almost unapproachable. But behind the scenes, there's rumbling. According to internal sources, McLaren is said to have already held talks to define clear protocols for future wheel-to-wheel situations between the drivers. The last thing Stella and Brown want is an escalation a la Hamilton-Rosberg 2016. And yet this very scenario seems increasingly likely. With only a 22-point lead over Norris, Piastri's once comfortable championship advantage is suddenly fragile. And the closer Norris gets, the narrower the boundary between sporting rivalry and internal chaos becomes. In Singapore, however, Piastri stuck to his line. Keep quiet, analyze, move on. "I think you just have to learn from this weekend and see what can be improved," he said at the end. Matter of fact, calm, controlled. But for many observers, it's clear. The silence was louder than any answer. The silence after Singapore was almost more disturbing than the crash itself. No public dispute, no clear words. Just this controlled restraint that in Formula One often speaks louder than any press conference. McLaren had officially closed the book on the incident between Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris. But internally it was clear something had changed. The relationship between the two drivers, which was once characterized by mutual respect, now hangs in the balance. Piastri, who as championship leader had behaved impeccably until now, saw Norris's aggressive attack as a strategic affront. It wasn't just an overtaking attempt, it was a sign. Proof that Lando, long considered the team favorite, is ready to risk everything, even team harmony, to preserve his own chance at the title. Within McLaren, this tension is openly discussed. Team principal Andrea Stella made an effort to publicly defend both drivers, but behind closed doors the tone was sharper. It's known that the championship duel between the two won't only be decided on track, but also in their minds, in the way they interact with each other, in their loyalty to the team. Oscar Piastri lost in Singapore. Not many points, but a piece of composure. For the first time in months, he was on the defensive. His restraint, his silence about the collision was no accident, but an attempt to maintain control while discussions exploded around him. Media, experts, former drivers, all asking themselves the same thing. Is McLaren heading toward an internal power struggle? Lando Norris, meanwhile, seized the opportunity to strengthen his own position. His podium in Singapore was more than just a sporting success, it was a statement. While Piastri acted defensively, Norris presented himself as the determined, risk-taking challenger. He smiled in interviews, joked with journalists, but behind that smile was calculation. He knows that McLaren can't afford an internal escalation, but he also knows that pressure is Piastri's greatest weakness. Team management now finds itself in a dilemma. Stella and Brown have a luxury problem that can easily turn into a catastrophe. Two top drivers, both in the title fight, both talented and ambitious, but with fundamentally different characters. Piastri is analytical, precise, predictable. Norris is emotional, instinctive, explosive. If McLaren really wants the World Championship title, Stella must learn to maintain the balance between these two forces. But that will be more difficult than it sounds. Already in Baku, it was seen that McLaren doesn't always operate strategically without errors. In Singapore, this pattern continued. Communication problems, different strategies, lack of clarity. The team that seemed untouchable just 2 months ago is beginning to waver. Piastri feels it. In his interview after the race, when he emphasized that it was a great moment for the team, it sounded less like pride than duty. He knows that every word is analyzed, every hesitation interpreted. So he'd rather say nothing, hoping that silence will protect him. But in Formula One, there is no protection, especially not when you're at the top. The rivalry between Piastri and Norris now resembles the great internal duels of the past. Senna versus Prost, Hamilton versus Rosberg. What began as sporting competition is slowly developing into a psychological test of strength. Both know they need each other to push the team forward, and both know that only one of them can really win in the end. Norris has shown in recent weeks that he's ready to drive more aggressively, make bolder decisions. His attack on the first lap in Singapore was an example of that. Risky, borderline, but also a sign that he no longer wants to hide in his teammate's shadow. Piastri, on the other hand, faces his biggest test yet. After months of perfection, after consistent performances, he must now prove that he can handle setbacks. A true champion, experts say, is not defined by victories, but by his reaction to defeats. And Singapore was exactly that. A defeat, but also an opportunity to show character. In the coming races, it will be decided whether McLaren can maintain the balance. If not, the season that looked like a historic double success could end in internal conflict. Because one thing is certain, the title race is far from over, neither on the track nor in McLaren's garage.